Good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon.
Thank you for joining us this afternoon. And thank you to those who had reached out over the last 18 to 24 hours and having patience. I wanted to try to, I don't know if this is going to be a commonplace, but at least it gives us the opportunity that we can get the answers directly from me to any questions you might have and any statements that I might be able to offer you as we move forward. So I appreciate that. And obviously you are very experienced in now this Zoom thing. So I want to thank you for joining us. Before I get started, a couple of things. Please let your readers and listeners know that, first of all, that the LHSAA does not work on the same playing field, so to speak, in status as our universities. We are not in that system. We work with adolescents, 13, depending on the 13 to 18. And we work the schools that fall under the state of Louisiana's Department of Education and the Board of Elementary and Secondary Education. Also I know we're a private entity, but in my tenure here, we have not acted as though we've been one. I worked with transparency. I worked as much open as we can with everybody in all the issues that we've had. But at the end of the day, we share public, private schools, all receiving state funding of some sort or another, whether direct or indirectly, and all adhere to what is set forth by the Board of Elementary and Secondary Education, as well as Department of Education and those other entities, and the Louisiana School Boards Association, Superintendents Association, and all of those educational leadership. So please let them know that LSU might be able to do this, ULM can do this, Nichols can do this, Tulane can do this, but that doesn't mean that the LHSAA and our member high schools can do this. Okay, that's why we are where we're sitting today, number one. Number two, our surrounding states, not all of them are using the phase system. So if Arkansas is doing something, who I have direct contact with Lance Taylor, the executive director. If Mississippi is doing something, I contact and we have conversation with Mr. Don Hinton. If Tennessee's doing something, Mr. Bernard Childers. If Alabama's doing something, Steve Savaries. Dr. Tom in Florida. All the surrounding states. Just because they're doing something doesn't mean we're going to, and just because we're doing something doesn't mean they're going to. So to use those comparisons is not fair to any of the surrounding states because they are doing things differently. We are in a state that's using phases. I say that to say this. Past legislative session, House Bill 59, which now is Act 9, specifically addresses the minimum standards requirements for our state schools to operate and open safely. A week ago yesterday, there was the deadline for all of our membership schools to submit to the Department of Education and to our state school superintendent, Mr. Brumley, their plans for operation and opening. We have approximately a number, 30% or so of the schools are opening in the process every week. They're going to continue to open until we get through August and potentially a number of schools opening after Labor Day and in early September. So that said, Act 9 specifically gives us direction under the phases in which we can be in. For example, now we're in phase 2. In phase 2, with what was adopted by the Bessie Board, by direction through legislation, is the static groups of 25. Not until we get to phase 3 does that group change to 50. So as long as we're in 25, that doesn't mean that the governor says it's a static group of 50 and the businesses can be 50% capacity and all of those other numbers that may be throwing out that doesn't work on us as we are doing what we are doing under the Department of Education and through the Bessie. That's what we do as an agency. We share the same schools. We share over 100,000 athletes. So the decisions that we make today, tomorrow, and as we move forward are all in compliance with what the governor tells us to do. Not only does this state sit and listen to what the governor says, but all of the surrounding states I mentioned in the SEC and in Section 3 of the National Federation, we all do the same thing in that regard by looking for leadership from the highest seat in our state, and that's our governor. Myself, Mr. Federico is on this Zoom call. He's the president of the LHSAA Executive Committee. He will be available for any specific questions you may have of him if you need so. Also, Dr. Greg Stewart, our medical advisor and chairman of the Louisiana High School Athletic Association Sports Medicine Advisory Committee. and also chairs a collegiate sports medicine advisory committee as well, is our doctor. He's our medical expert. He leads us in what we can and can't do as we move forward through the phases. And I'll get to that here in just a second. So Act 9 puts us in a position where we have to do what needs to be done by what the state standard is, minimum standard, and what state statute says. So I go back to the private entity. Well, why can't you just say we can do this? Or why don't you just grow some leadership and do this? Well, you know what? It doesn't do any good for us to do that, number one, because that would be putting our membership in a position to, well, the LHSAA said, yet it puts them in conflict with state statute. And that statute is an immunity bill, which is the title on the street, which is a frivolous lawsuit, a prohibited bill that allows schools and other agencies to operate. So you can't get sued, you could, but you know what I'm saying, where people can't bring lawsuit against you over COVID-19, a potential contract made on your side or in the schools as we open those schools up and move forward through this process. So we work closely with all those agencies. I use it in a term of hurricane, contraflow. We're all going the same direction, potentially in different lanes. We know our lanes, but we're all going in the same direction. That's for the safe opening of schools and the communications that you've seen out of this office, which are those that we want to ensure that whenever we do get those safe openings and we do that process, that we do it through medical advice and through our governor's recommendations, that we blend athletics back into the system. So today, the communication come out where we're sitting here today. A lot of thought went into that. We've been waiting for time, and we waited until, like everybody waited till the governor. Many of you I've spoken to wanted to see what the governor was going to do. Some of us may not be surprised that we remained in phase two. Maybe some were surprised that we're doing 21 days versus potentially 14. But at the end of the day, it's 21 days. The good news is, if you read the document, I believe some of you have that document. It was to many of you shortly after we sent it out to membership, is that of the potential 32,000, almost 33,000 athletes that we have participating in fall sports, we have approximately 13,055, around 39%, 40%, that are going to basically either get to start on time, which would be cross country and swimming, or when we get into phase 3 in 21 days, to be able to start the season with some form of scrimmage and start playing interscholastic competition, which would be the sport of volleyball. So when that's all said and done, that's about 13,000 participants that with the COVID are still going to get to start playing. Now we have about 19,000 football players. I get that. And it seems like everybody wants to talk about football. I get that too. But also know as an executive director that I represent all of the students in all of the sports. And the way I look at this is 4 out of 10, 40%, however you want to swing the numbers, are getting to start participation, which is a heck of a lot better than what we had for our spring athletes as the virus took place in March. I do not want to have to put in a position again to have to cancel anything. And it took a lot of time. If you all remember, we waited till the last possible minute to cancel. We waited the last possible minute to finish the boys basketball championships, and one of the last, if not the last event in the United States that were still participating that Friday and Saturday in March when we finished the public school boys championships. So I think, as the executive committee and myself, is we're going to do the best we can to get kids play, coaches coach. And of course, the argument continues on whether we should be opening schools, not opening schools, and so on and so forth. That's not why we're here today. We're here today to discuss fall sports. So in the grand scheme of things, of the 32, almost 33,000 students that we have that could be participating, we're addressing close to 14,000 of them right now, which is cross country, can start in phase 2. There's a plan in place. Plan's not public yet, but the plan's in place. We're fine tuning that. Dr. Stewart has seen the 3 plans, which will be for cross country, swimming, and volleyball. He's online here. He'll address that in a few minutes, but he's approved those. He's given us approval, and he can address if there's any more particulars about that. Volleyball can't start till we get to phase 3. That's a static group of 50, which that date would be 21 days from which I think is that third week in August. Excuse me, that that third week, that third or fourth week there, the 28th of August is when the end of the day, but I'm saying then they can scrimmage, and volleyball could then begin September 8 and 9. So they're getting to participate. So 3 of the 4 are going to get an opportunity, which I think lays the groundwork for where we get to football. Football, phase 2, still helmets and shoulder pads. They're going to be in those for another month, right out of a month. Some schools started, the large majority, probably 7 out of 10 of our football schools started football on Monday. Tomorrow they put the shoulder pads on. Some that did not start and are going to start next week for whatever reasons, they go helmets, shoes, pads on the 13th, 10th and 13th. And all other fall sports, as you know, begin on the 10th. So we're on track to do all of that as we speak. Our principals, our athletic directors, and all of the coaches of those respective sports all have plans in place for those athletes coming onto campus, which they've already been coming onto campus, as summer rules are still in effect till the 10th, and are all in place and have been doing an incredible job. Has it prevented COVID from infiltrating those camps? No, it has not. Has it cut a large majority of that out? It has. So we have plans in place for if athletes do test positive. We have plans in place for if the coaches test positive, and the isolation of those respective contracted individuals, as well as the continual use of the group, the static groups of 25 as we sit here today. So when we look at all that we put together, I think at this point we're making progress. We're going forward. So football. It's not until we get out of phase 2 into phase 3 by direction of medical that we can put the football players in all their gear. Still no contact. But really, in conversation with Dr. Stute, he says, Eddie, make sure you explain that there's a difference in contact and collision. And football is a collision sport. You know you're going to put athletes in pads, and if we're still allowing 7-on-7, there's probably going to be some kind of contact, whether it be guarding receivers, releasing from the line, whatever it is, there's going to be some contact. But we're going to try to limit that. And we use the coaches' discretion and those medical people on site for discretion for that. So we are able to get through those particular days in phase 3, and phase 2. Then we get to phase 3, which we're hoping is at the end of this month. We get to phase 3, we can put all the gear on the football players. Still no collisions, but now they can acclimate not only the shoulder pad and helmet use, but also having pads on their entire body. They can do tackling wheels, all the dummies, all the sleds, anything and everything they can. We're still just not having any collisions within the sport. What we need is 10 to 14 days in phase 3 at the discretion of our governor, Dr. Stewart, Dr. Welch, who's helping on the governor's Resilient Louisiana plan. Those individuals, if we see that decline, which we think we're going to get, we start seeing that decline in those cases and positive cases, then Dr. Stewart, in communication with the governor's office and Dr. Welch, at that point can say, Eddie, we can start the collision sport. Once we do that, 21 days. We need full contact, controlled contact and collision for 21 days to toughen the players up, get soft tissue squared away so we can start football, which is that date we now have is that 21st day. It would be October 2nd or 3rd. They can potentially have a scrimmage or jamboree. They get ready for the next week, and they can start scheduling for that Thursday and Friday and or that Saturday. That's not week 1 being pushed back to week 3. That's starting with a competition week 3. So whoever the week 3 opponents are, that's where we would start with football and move forward. We are working with the Superdome. We still have the dates scheduled for the Prep Classic that we had before, 10, 11, and 12. We're talking about the following week. We're talking about not Christmas week, but the week after that, which could potentially give us a 8-game, 7-game, and or 6-game schedule, ending in the Prep Classic in the Superdome. We have to work around the New Orleans Bowl, and we have to potentially work around or work with the preparation for the Sugar Bowl. So in a nutshell, my opening, that's where we are as I sit here today. I will open it for questions, and I ask you, when you have a question, when you unmute your microphone, would you please identify yourself for the record so we know who's asking, so everybody knows. I think everybody probably recognizes each other, but just for the record so we know who they are. Question though, first, you want to hear from Dr. Stewart and Mr. Federico first? You want to have your questions and come back? It doesn't matter to me, your conference to me, you tell me how you'd like to see that happen. Anybody?
Eddie, can you go over the dates again? I want to make sure we got this exactly right as far as football. Can you go over that again?
Yes,
Please.
sir. Let me grab it right here. So obviously this past Monday, August the 3rd,
Right.
we initiated, that would be this particular week, Ed, was the week that was always set aside for those schools who did not participate in spring football.
Correct.
This year, nobody participated. We actually had 6 schools that participated in spring football, but in permissive date times prior to us shutting down. It would have been January and February. So we had 6 schools, but overall, nobody got spring football. So
Okay.
I said way back in a press conference that we're gonna let people start early if we can get there to get it started. So they started on Monday with helmets and shoes. Tomorrow they go helmets and shoulder pads for those schools who did not start. Next Monday, helmets and shoes. The following, that Thursday, the 13th, helmets and shoulder pads. And all during, from now until we get to the end of the month, Ed, they can wear shoulder pads, they can take them off. They can have helmets on and no shoulder, any combination they want to. That's up to the discretion of the coaches. They might want to give the kids 2 or 3 days where they're just in hats and shoes. Whatever, it gives them the ability to have some flexibility with that and keeping safety in mind at all times. The next date for football would then be, for right now, is what we have is the first permissive football dates for games is October the 8th, 9th, or 10th. That's a Thursday, a Friday, or a Saturday.
All right. There'll be jamborees the week before or not, Eddie?
If we make it to where we're in full contact, I got a calendar. Give me stepping out of the screen here. Let me give you a date.
All right.
The 21st day, if we're in phase 3, the 21st day is that Friday, which at that point, if we made it that far, then we're going to go ahead and have something happen that Friday or Saturday in full contact, and they could do something interscholastically.
So you would have a jamboree on the 2nd or 3rd?
I'm not going to say jamboree. We can have something that's interscholastically. Yes, sir. It could be a jamboree. It could be an interscholastic scrimmage, whatever somebody can figure out at that point. That's why I have a TBA on the calendar.
Jamboree or scrimmage on the 2nd or the 3rd, right?
The 2nd and 3rd of October?
Yes.
Yes, sir.
Okay, then the season the following week. And what's the latest the prep classic could be played, Eddie?
Nothing's been confirmed right now, but what I'm looking at so we can get in an 8-week, a 7-week, or 6-week schedule would be a 6-week schedule. Worst case scenario would be, I think it's a 6-week schedule, but including some playoffs would be the week that we already have scheduled, which is the 10th, 11th, and 12th.
Okay.
I've had conversation with Alan Freeman. You all know Alan down at the Superdome. We've
Right.
had conversation about potentially playing that next week. Downside, that's finals week. But I've also handed out diplomas in state baseball on the mound. So
Okay, you
that's
could be
potentially
17,
that week. But
17,
that
18,
week,
19, right?
that's correct, sir. But that week, we're up against the New Orleans Bowl,
Okay.
which I believe is the 18th or 19th. The preparation to set the facility up would probably be the 17th. So if we did do something that week, it would probably have to be a Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday.
Monday,
If we
Tuesday.
stayed with that plan. If we stay with that plan. But
Okay.
also know that I believe, correct me if wrong, you're the sports people, SEC championship game has been moved to the 19th of December. Is that correct?
Yes.
So now we've got the SEC game. Is your New Orleans Bowl the 18th or 19th? I don't know whatever name, but it could eventually be up against one another there. Not
The 19th.
but that's just a sidebar, if you will.
Right.
So, Eddie, your goal is to play an 8-game season and end at the time you were going to end before. Just shrink the schedule a little bit. 8-game season and still end with the Superdome Classic as normal, correct?
That if we start on the 8th and 9th, it will not give us the 8 weeks necessary to get to the 10th, 11th, and 12th, Douglas. We have to. That would give it if we move the prep classic back in December, which we're working to see if that's even feasible to do. Number one, okay. But if not, if we kept the season the way it is now, starting on the 8th and 9th and playing at the regular time, that's a 6-game season with some playoff structure.
Eddie,
And let me follow through with this, if I could. The schedule, whenever you start, would start with what those teams have scheduled. It wouldn't be week 1 moving back. They would just start in week 3 or 4 with the district teams or the games they have scheduled. Is that correct?
That is correct, Fletcher.
Eddie, what's the latest you could play the championship? What's the possible latest days you could play the championship, that the building would be available? What would you be comfortable with?
We can't go anywhere in the dome after the last part of December. And all that hinges also, Ed, and you and Kim, and all of you down in New Orleans, on whether they play the Sugar Bowl on New Year's Day or bottom line is, if we don't play in December and we choose to move for whatever reasons, we have a bump in the schedule and we have to play outdoors someplace in January, we could also do that, Ed.
You could play outdoors.
That's also in a tentative plan, potentially play in a stadium outside of the Superdome in January.
Outside.
Eddie, if we are not ready to come out of phase 3 or come out of phase 2 in the state of Louisiana, is it still on the table that the season could slide back, start even later, and go into the winter or spring? Is that still on the table?
I would say it's on the table, Douglas. We've discussed it, but right now it starts creeping into the other sports, because I'm going to tell you right now, with the conversation and what we released today, I've had a few emails already. Does this mean that basketball start is going to be pushed back? No, we're not going to keep messing with sports. We're given our fall sports to have this long practice time, and if that's what we need for basketball, it is what it is. And we're adding 2 or 3 more weeks to that layover, but it gives those athletes who are already basketball players and wrestlers, if you will, the opportunity to start doing what they need to prepare in the transition to starting back again and doing what they need to do under restrictions necessary for COVID. So all those mitigating measures have got to start. And think about that for a second. Wrestling, that sport, what that's going to look like. Dr. Stewart's already working on that. Basketball is considered a high risk. So we're going to work on our way through that to get the process done. So we're trying to do this a little baby steps at a time. Hence why I didn't release the plans we have for what all the mitigating measures are necessary, including we haven't talked about what the sidelines are going to look like in football and what the sidelines are going to look like in volleyball and what has to happen when they come in and off the court in volleyball and what those wave starts are going to look like in cross country. That's all been done. Those are the plans that Dr. Stewart has been reviewing that we're getting ready to send out shortly. It's forthcoming, as I said in the communication today, are coming out. So it gives you all more of an idea of how we're going to move forward with all of those, including what if we start on the 8th and 9th, what it looks like. If we start on the following week, what it looks like. If we start as deep as the 3rd week of October, what it'll look like and where we end up and what that would look like when it comes to the postseason.
You mentioned 6. I'm sorry.
Oh, I was just going to ask, just wanted to make sure that I understand it right. If at any time with the way it is, we're 35 days away from interscholastic competition for football in terms of, because we need 14 days of consecutive improvement once we reach to phase 3 and then 21 days after. Is that correct? Do I have that correct?
As soon as, yes, sir. Brady, you are correct. I'm not going to muddy the waters. You are correct. What you stated is correct.
Okay.
You mentioned a 6-game season, 7-game season, or 8-game season. Could you maybe tell us, like, if it's 6 weeks, what would be the state championship date, and then for 7 and for 8? I think that might make it a little clearer.
George, I have, if you don't mind, I have Eric Held, who's been working with me on the project. Eric is on here. He's the director of the Coaches Association, longtime coach. Eric, would you unmute, please, and answer the questions for George or what we have on the whiteboard right now for football with what he just requested.
Sure, George. Great to talk to you. It's been a while.
Yep.
Yeah, so everything's just contingent on getting started on October 8th, 9th, and 10th, that football playing weekend. And then, of course, in Mr. Bonine's conversations with the Superdome, what is available, when it's available. Getting started on that second weekend of October would be crucial to having a longer regular season to where it would look more like a regular season. The prospects of playing a full regular season are probably not going to happen, of course. Our coaches know that. Of course, they want to play as much of the regular season and as much of a postseason.
George, here's the deal. If we start on the 8th, 9th, and 10th
Okay.
and target that's finished as our normal schedule, the 10th, 11th, and 12th of December, that's a six-game regular season.
December
If we
10th,
start
11th,
on-
and
yes,
12th.
sir. If we start on the 8th, 9th, and 10th, and we play that last week in December, which would be what is that, the 20, maybe even that Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, could very really be that Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, then that would be the 8-game regular season and then the regular postseason. If you start chipping away with it, you can do the math. Then it becomes a 7, then it becomes a 6 if you go back the other way with that start date. Ideally, playing at the end of the month in December is where we would get the maximum amount of games played. If we're not able to do that for whatever reasons, then if we start as the earliest, which is very ambitious for us on the 8th, 9th, and 10th, and we go back in and play the Prep Classic when it's normally scheduled, then that's where you have the 6-week schedule, regular season schedule, and then the postseason. I will say with talking to the football coach advisory, which represented all classifications around the state, 7 was the game. It was the 7-game schedule was kind of we want to really try to get at least this, okay? But we had conversations about 6, and we even had some conversation about 5. At one point, playing something is better than not playing anything at all. But we'll cross that bridge if and when we need to get there, George. And I'm not hoping we don't get there. We're just trying to lay it out. But
Okay, so just to be clear, so if it's 8 games, the championship likely would be the last week of December. If it's
Correct.
7, then it would be the week before that, and then the other one would be the week before that.
that is correct.
Eddie, what about the possibility people are asking about fans? And I think that's something that's going to have to develop as we go through phases. I mean, you don't really know anything about that yet.
I do not, but you know what? It's a great segue to Dr. Greg Stewart, because they've been having that conversation at the university level. And
Good deal.
also he's going to be working with CDC guidelines and working with us on that if and when we get there, obviously. But Dr. Greg, if you would come on in and help me out with that question.
I think a lot of that answer is going to be all up to local. I mean, it's going to be a parish decision. Obviously, the governor is going to have a stake in that as far as what he opens and where we are and what he says. But obviously, the local public health as well as the local superintendents are going to be the ones making those decisions. And one of the conversations Mr. Bonine and I have had, I think I froze. One of the conversations that we have had is that we're primarily worried about what happens on the field and on the court and on the track, and we're going to leave it up to the schools, superintendents, and local parish officials to decide what happens in the stands.
Obviously, though, following those guidelines from the state, they'd have to follow whatever guidelines are. It's not like somebody could step out and say, "Oh, come on, let's let everybody come to this game this week."
Correct. I guess once the governor has set his, then obviously the local officials can be more strict, but obviously not less strict than what the governor establishes.
Okay.
Hey, Eddie, this is Michael Cobble. If I could get a question in. At what point do you fish or cut bait as far as sliding the state championship game out of the Superdome? So we all want this October kickoff, but if that doesn't happen, do we get to a point where, all right, we're going into plan 2 and we're going to start in early November and we're going to slide the state championship game to January?
And Michael, it's a good question. And I would say the end of October. I think at that particular point, we've had a lot of numbers. We've had a lot of observations. We'll know where we're going, where we're not going. I truly believe that, Michael, I'm the glass half full guy. All right, we're talking about what we can do, and I truly believe that the state of Louisianans are going to know what's up at stake here with a lot of things outside of high school sports. And we've already seen, as the governor said yesterday, moderate changes. We're starting to make the difference by doing what we're asked to do. So in the end of October, and we'll know if we're having to push back October 8th, 9th, and 10th, patience is going to be a key, number one. And number two, then we start looking at what it potentially could be and start making those decisions, Michael. But know that we have an executive committee meeting on the 8th and 9th of September, which is a regular scheduled meeting outside the emergency one we had today. And by then we'll know more, but I truly believe that by the time we get through the month of August and we're moving into phase 3, I think we'll see we're in a position where we're getting some momentum to get to where we need to, Michael, and not have to worry about that. But I would say the end of October will probably be that stage where we got to, at that point, decide we're playing the Prep Classic at the Superdome. Probably going to happen. We got to start looking someplace else. We've already been looking someplace else, but we're not going to wait till then to do so. But that would be our next play.
You mentioned that this was an ambitious, that you guys would get started because, as you know, from the whatever date that they could move at the 20th or so, it's going to be a 42-day period before the start of the season, and knowing that you have to have 35 days before you can start the competition. I guess, is that something that you want to make sure to realize or put out there, that this is an ambitious plan by you guys? This is almost perfect scenario type of thing that has to happen for that to happen.
And you just did. Yeah, you're exactly right.
Okay.
Realistic could be the second week, but this is ambitious. But I truly believe positively that we just saw what we can do in just the last week, 2 weeks since it was announced. Now we have 21 more days. I truly believe we're going to bring the numbers down. And look at me. Whether you like the numbers or I like the numbers, we got to use the numbers. And if people want to badmouth the numbers, they can do what they want to do with the numbers. But at the end of the day, that's what we're using. That's what's going to be used. And the gentleman who just spoke to you, Dr. Greg, says, Eddie, we're ready to go. That's a hell of a burden for a guy, one person in his committee, to make that decision that, Eddie, let's start the collision sport. And I trust him. And that's why we talk every day. So we work our way through it. So, Brady, it's ambitious. I'll use the term ambitious, yeah. But you know what? If you're not ambitious, you don't get anything done. And I think that's what we're trying to get done here. We want to play football. I want kids to play football. Parents want kids to play football yesterday. But we got to do this safely, because it's easy to say that. And I think I said, I'll sign a waiver. The parents, I'll let us play. We're going to let them play. That's what we're working toward here. Because what's the alternate here? Nothing. No sports. We've already been down that ugly road in the spring, and we're going to do everything we can to prevent that from happening again. So it's about patience, common sense, using medical knowledge, and relying on the experts to tell us, you know what, it's safe now. But that doesn't mean that we're not going to have a hiccup along the way, and how we're going to handle those hiccups. And we're prepared for that. We're preparing for that as well, Brady. Good question. Good comment. Hold on a second. Andrew, you popped up a couple of times. Go ahead. I guess I'll start calling on people. How about that?
If the state doesn't move into phase 3 coming up at the end of August, does that automatically constitute a delayed start and pushing back?
Did you see my facial expression when you said that?
A little bit.
Yeah, gosh, it would definitely be another curveball. Looking fastball and got another curveball. That's what it would be. Yes, sir. We would have to really adjust one way or the other on it would be very ambitious then to start trying to plan how that's going to work and looking at the other sports seasons as well. So yes, sir, that'd be difficult, but I really don't think that's going to happen. I think we're going to move forward and for business's sake and for a lot of people's sake, I truly believe that Louisianans will pull together and we'll get this thing done.
Hey, Eddie, this is
Let me go, Tim Fletcher. Timmy, let's go, and I'll come back to Tim. Go ahead.
You mentioned the hiccups that could possibly be out there. If there is a series of positive tests in a certain area or in one school, and all of a sudden you've got a number of athletes or coaches that are being quarantined, out of commission, what is kind of built into the season to allow that to happen to where the season could be completed? Or is there something along the lines of, hey, look, if we have a widespread case in a certain district, these schools may play 4 games, these may play 7. How is that all set up as far as when positive tests do come in among some of these schools?
Good question, and it's not the first one time it's been answered, okay? I mean, been asked, and here's the answer. First of all, we're not going to hold anything against the school that for whatever reason has to not fulfill a game commitment or games commitment depending upon the sport, number one. Okay, we did have a conversation today, food for thought to the executive committee. All the volleyball and football are the 2 of the 4 that have a power ranking system. And we're going to keep the power ranking system in place. So if a school has to miss 1 week of football or potentially 2 weeks, depending upon the quarantine time and how many athletes are involved, Are those games going to be forfeiters? Are there going to be no contests? Are there going to be canceled games? And each one of those brings its own number if you look at the formula for power ranking. We haven't made that decision yet. So but I want people to know that I know forfeiture is a negative connotation, and that's not on the front line for me. But at the end of the day, those forfeitures will all be, if they did, that is what it is, will be backed out at the end of the season. It's not going to be held against anybody. There's not going to be any penalties. We're going to hope that people get better and we'll move forward. Like in volleyball, you could use potentially a postponement because they have enough time in their season and they can play more than one time a week, multiple games, and work in an open date and get those games in. What we haven't talked about, Timmy, is that if you have two schools who had different opponents that both had COVID and their district, do we risk changing games, changing the schedule, and then that leaves another void in a schedule? So start moving a lot of pieces around. We got to take a closer look at that, Tim. We haven't looked at it that closely, but we had the conversation because when we started taking weeks off, I wanted to know what's the minimum amount of number of games we can play without affecting some districts. But all of our districts aren't, as you know, aren't the same size. We have some that have 8 games, some that have 7, some that have 6, some that only have 4. It just depends on classification in the district. So we've taken all that into consideration. So we'll take it, use common sense, and we'll take each week. I'm assuming our Sundays are going to be busy each week and see what happens, where we're at, and the reporting to us if we have any incidents with athletes, coaches.
Eddie.
We thought that. Let me go see. Hunter, you're up, and then Robin, you're up next.
Yeah, concerning the playoffs, do y'all have a plan as to will there still be the same number of teams for playoffs, or will that be reduced depending on what phase we're in and where we're at in the calendar?
Hunter, it's a great question, and what we're looking at right now, starting the 8th and 9th, we start on the 8th and 9th, that there will be a reduction in the qualification of teams to be played. Yes, sir. And as we continue to get deeper in, if we have fewer games, then that would then those amount of qualifiers would start to change. Yes, sir.
Have you guys had any questions about travel restrictions? That's been brought up to me by a couple of coaches. There are concerns, rumors out there that teams or schools are going to be locked into kind of playing in their own area as opposed to going somewhere else. Or would there be a possibility where a team could say, hey, we don't want to play them because there's a surge in their area or there's a spike, or we don't want to go there for a game? Has that come up in the discussion?
And yes, Robin, we have had that conversation. Those questions have been posed here. And yes, there are a number of parishes that have stated something to the fact that they may have travel restrictions and not be able to leave their parish. So that means they might be able to play schools, however many they might be within their parish, not mean that they're all in the same district, but could play each other, but not leave the parish. That's going to be one of those obstacles we're going to have to address, use common sense, and have communication on with this office, with the principals of the member schools and those respective superintendents of those respective parishes, and see what we can work out once we get past getting all the schools open. Let's get all the schools open and see then what we have, because we've talked about potential bumps in the road by having outbreaks with our athletes. What happens if the congregate size school, all of a sudden there's an outbreak at a specific school, and
that's right,
they decide to shut the whole doggone school down? And then does that mean that can the athletes still play or not play because they didn't go to school this week? We've thought about all those potential ugly scenarios that could potentially happen. And yes, we have had the conversation about people not leaving their own parish or traveling through their parish, depending on how many miles. In some parishes, they can travel 70, 80 miles one way before they can get to another school within their same parish.
Has there been any talk about, if we're having to drop to the less than the 6 games or the 6-game season, of maybe changing around the district schedules and maybe not, I guess, allowing teams to schedule as they will? Or is that not even on the table?
Brady, we haven't had that conversation, so I'd say it's not on the table, but that doesn't mean we still got plenty of time here. I'm assuming once we submit or we release what it looks like, people are going to pull it apart and make recommendations or look at us, and we're open-minded. But that's why I think all of you know this, and I hate using the term it's fluid, but I said this to a couple of you. We have this conversation today, and you've all nodded your head, and you're going to print what you're going to print, and you're going to report what you need to report. Come Friday, it may not be the same because of something we learned tomorrow. And that's kind of the way we've had to approach this thing. Back in the day, to me, it was told, hey, Eddie, you and I agreed on something yesterday that we may not talk about and agree on tomorrow because of something we learned today. And that's kind of the approach I've had to take this. It's irritating. I try to be proactive. I try to be prepared. I think you all know that. But right now, it seems as though a lot of what we do is preventive medicine and it's reactionary. And I'm not the only one that feels this way. All my colleagues across the nation feel the same way. But we didn't just decide to shut everything down and pick up again in January and keep our fingers crossed that, hey, we hope that we can play a 6-6-6 in 18 weeks next year and not have any championships like some states have done or shut things down. So please, if you will, write something or report something like that we're trying to get this done. We can't rush into it. We can't. But I'll take the bullets for that. Broad shoulders and a big chest, man. I'll take the bullets if we're going to delay it. But the bottom line is at the end of the day, when all of you are interviewing our athletes, hopefully in the Superdome or at the Pontchartrain Center or in Natchitoches after cross country or down in Lake Charles, the Sulphur area for swimming, we did it. And that's what we want to get to. That's our goal. And at that point, hopefully there's more therapeutics. We have a vaccine and we can put this behind us and try to bring back some normality. And in the meantime, blend athletics back into the educational setting. Because we all agree, kids need to get back into class, whatever that means, whatever the educational system and delivery system is. They need to start learning again. They need to get their brains working again. And they need to have athletics back. And that's what we're trying to accomplish. It's just going to take some time to do it.
Will there be a reduction in playoff teams? I know it was asked, but it was a little unclear. Will there be fewer playoff teams with the schedule as is now?
There will be fewer in football specifically. There will probably be fewer teams if we're going to have fewer weeks, and depending upon the length of that season and how many games we're able to get in. Yes, that is on the table, and Eric is working on schedules as we speak. Mr. Federico, President of the LHSAA Executive Committee, any comments you'd like to add or anybody like to add? Let him have some comments, and if you have questions for David, great leader, been around a long time, native Louisiana, you all know David. So David, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Bonine, and thank all of you all for joining us today. I think basically, as Mr. Bonine has said, it's a changing picture every day. Yesterday, the governor made his decision. He had a press conference, and we were able to pull our executive committee together by 9 o'clock this morning so we could talk. We came up with some plans. Remember that everything we came up with, basically, that came from not just the LHSAA, but from advisory committees that were put together quickly by the staff to get their input and their decisions on what. I know we've talked a lot today about football, but we're trying to get every sport going. We want these kids to have an opportunity to play as much as they can possibly play. We know changes are still coming, and we're trying to get schools open. We're trying to do everything possible to get the kids. In my case, I'm redoing schedules. I'm moving classrooms. I'm keeping kids in as many classrooms as possible. So in addition to doing all that, we also have to make sure that we get sports going, but we get sports going safely. Dr. Stewart's the person. He's there. I've worked with him for many years. He gives us tremendous information. And what all the parents need to understand, because I've seen the messages to Mr. Bonine, let the kids play, let the kids play. Act 9 is going to govern what we can do and what we can't do right now as schools. And y'all talked about fans. That's not an LHSAA decision. We don't determine if the fans are there. The numbers that are set up by Bessie and Act 9 determine whether we can have fans or we can't have fans. So we work hard every day, we communicate every day, and we hope to keep this going so these kids can enjoy the sports season and some kind of normalcy in school. I'll be happy to answer any questions. If not, I'll turn it back to Dr. Stewart and Mr. Bonine.
Dr. Stewart, would you add anything just so they can have any questions for you and let them know where we stand and what process you're using, please?
I think that one of the important things, especially at this point, is to go back, and I don't know that we can stress it enough, is that if everybody wants fall sports, and whether that's high school, college, professional sports, if they want that to happen, then they got to listen to the governor. They got to be wearing masks. They got to do the physical distancing. They've got to do the hand hygiene. We've got to do that. If we do it, we'll be fine. But everyone's got to understand that what they do is going to have consequences on Friday nights in the state of Louisiana. And so that becomes, I think, one of the most important things. The other, just to keep in mind, is that, while we're making decisions, a lot of what we're doing is implementing guidelines from the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, the National Federation, like Mr. Bonine said, the Department of Education and Bessie. And while we write things up and are putting things together, every time one of those organizations and several others start putting out changes, we're going back and reviewing all of our documents to make sure that that we're compliant with all of the local, state, and national guidelines. So it's an undertaking every time these new guidelines come out, and we have to implement it and apply that to every single sport. So understand that when there are changes that come out, if it takes us a day or so to do it, we're having to go back through cross-country starts, volleyball, at the net. What can football do and not do? What can they do in swimming? All the different aspects in order to make sure that all the rule changes are applied to all the different fall sports.
Hey, Eddie.
Yes.
I know you've gone over the calendar about 10 times already, but
okay.
If football starts on October 8th, you've got 4 playing dates in the month of October, right? And then 4 playing dates in the month of November. That's 8 games, right? And then
yes, sir.
State championships 10th, 11th, and 12th. So where do the playoffs work in there? I mean, how many rounds of playoffs then? If you're talking about 8 playing dates, 8 regular season games, that would eat up the entire month of October and November, right?
That is correct. Hence why we would use those first few weeks in December to get to the last week in December to get those 8 games plus the playoffs to get us into the month of December.
Okay, so there's no way the state championship takes place, obviously, 10th, 11th, 12th.
It would not. If we wanted to get that, it would be 6 games. It would be a 6 game if we were going to use the 10th, 11th, and 12th shot.
Okay, and so around the 18th, that's when you're dancing with the New Orleans Bowl, and then obviously you're not going to do something during Christmas, and then possibly after Christmas, a little bit.
It would be that Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday of that following week, which everybody's out anyway. Hopefully back, but the bottom line is that then we're going to open the door for the teams that qualify for the Sugar Bowl will be coming in and taking over the dome at that particular time.
Okay. Got you.
Yeah, you mentioned, Eddie, about playing potentially in January. What are the venues that you might consider playing in? Should it go to that?
Well, the first one I would look for is where the doctor's sitting right now. I guess we had Select down there last year at Tulane, not knowing what the dates looked there. We'd try to find a bigger venue like Tulane, potentially ULL or if there are other facilities like that are open and available. That's where, Christian, what we try to look for is some venue that size. Doesn't necessarily have to be a bigger venue, but we try to make it a bigger venue. But we try to look for a good playing surface and something that would provide us, depending upon at that point where we are, government-wise, on what the static group has to look like or how many people are allowed to get in a facility. I'd rather play in a bigger facility and be able to socially distance, unless you come with a group, a family or something, and get as more people we can in there, including bands and everything, the pageantry that goes along with it, and try to get for a bigger facility. So I'm just saying off the top of my head, Tulane would be one of the places we'd look at, or some other place around. I know that Shreveport always offers to open up there. So there's places around we could probably look at, Christian.
Have you talked to officials? How concerned are they in terms of in your plans as well? I know you got to plan that, but if you could just run down conversations you've had with the Officials Association and what their plans might be.
Absolutely, and great question. We don't want to forget about the officials. And I brought them up to believe on your show last week. The officials, they're going to remain safe. We're going to do all the same precautionary measures. Do they have concerns? But President, Mr. Paul Rosa down in New Orleans, we've had communications with him. Lee Sanders, our director of the Officials Association, out of our offices here, has that conversation with myself and officials on a regular basis. And we're doing everything we can to ensure not only our football officials, volleyball officials, all of our game and meet officials that we have for all those, Christian, are following the same kind of protocols, the same kind of safety stuff. If we have multiple games or multiple matches, whether it be volleyball if it's three-way or whatever it is, we're going to make sure everything is sanitized. We're going to do it right to ensure that we can have the games, but we keep everybody safe. And the officials are an important part of that. And I'm glad you brought that up. Thank you.
Eddie, I want to talk to the doc if I could. I got a question for the doc in particular. He mentioned earlier about the CDC. And I just want to know how encouraged he is. About a week and a half ago, the CDC expressed some significant optimism about 18 and younger not being significant carriers or spreaders of COVID-19. And how optimistic is he hearing that news?
I think it's helpful, but I think we also see that it's still out there. And in some of the younger elementary age and all, if getting it, it's potentially a bad version of it. So I think that there's a lot to be optimistic over with regard to that makes you feel a little better about some of the transmission. But at the same time, Mr. Bonine said, the virus is going to determine what we do. And we've certainly seen changes in what and how it acts from early January to the time that it's come here and continued to spread. So, I feel better about that, but we're taking, the same level of precautions that we possibly can at the high school level, and not making an assumption that high school students and student athletes in particular are immune from it.
Hey, Eddie, it's Michael Cobble again. If I can jump in here. Is there a preferred scenario whether you get 8 regular season games in and a delayed state championship game, or if 6 and an on-time state championship game is preferred? And then just a follow-up question, was last year maybe a blessing in disguise on the select side in that you now have an idea of how maybe multiple site state championships could work if needed this year?
Good question. Number one, ideal would be the 8 game. The most games we could play and pushing that championship back would be ideal for me. More games, the better. And then we get the playoff structure in, and we get the march to the Prep Classic. The second part of that is right now, and this is going to be news to all of you. I'm going to go ahead, Mr. Federico. Where's David? You still on here?
Yes, I'm here.
Could you want to speak to the survey and the offer in the survey right now? Is that, you think now is appropriate for that at this point?
We can talk about it. We had a meeting last Monday, I believe it was, with a group of select school principals, a committee that was put together by Mr. Ryan Gallagher, Brother Martin, and he's pretty much chairing that committee. The meeting, of course, was set up to discuss possible venues for the various sports. At that meeting, Mr. Bonine made an offer to the committee that we were inviting all of the select schools to come back to our venues this year to play with us. And the light that COVID is going on, there's so much uncertainty. The principals have so much to do in terms of running their schools right now. Pretty much that was unanimously accepted by the committee, and a survey went out to the schools asking them, the private and parochial schools, the select schools, are you willing to, number one, come back to all the venues that we have set up this year with the LHSAA? Or are you interested in coming back just for football? Are you interested in just coming back for baseball, softball, basketball, whatever? I think the results of that survey are due back to Mr. Gallagher by tomorrow or Friday, and we'll be hearing from him. But as I said, of the 10, 12 people who were there representing the schools, it was coaches, it was principals, It was athletic directors. The feeling was unanimous. We need to come back this year so that we do not have to worry about this issue, but the principals having enough on their plate.
Thank you, Mr. Federico. Michael? Anybody have any further questions, comments?
Hey, Eddie. Looking at the six game model, if it were to go to that, would that mean a reduction in one round of the football playoffs? And also, if games are going to be played on that October 8th start date, would teams start up with their Week 5 opponents and move back from there?
That Adam, you were breaking up for a second. Maybe somebody else heard. Would you repeat that? Well, just the last part one more time for me.
Sure. If we start competition on October 8th, playing games, would schools start with their Week 5 opponents and then work back from there towards the postseason?
That would be. I'm thinking that would be Week 3, starting on Week 3 opponents and moving toward the end of the season.
Okay.
Eddie, was the logistical challenges too much to overcome as to why you maybe would have to start in Week 3 or Week 4? Was it just too much in terms of the logistics of it to start at Week 1, even in October?
Well, Christian, because in football is one of the sports that we have the written contracts, the home and away contracts, and we're in the process now. We've got that lined up. We're going to start reclassification, realignment for 21-22. So usually, and I'm just going to make a broad brush statement here. Usually those first 2 or 3 weeks are non-district, non-conference games or out-of-state games with other state associations for the most part. So by getting deeper into the season, it was more addressing the district. We didn't come out and say, you know what, we're just going to play district games. But for the most part, that's kind of what it's going to boil down to. And that 8 game does give schools the option to maybe play that rival who's they normally play that's normally not in the meat of their season, if you will, weeks 3 through 10. So logistically, again, Eric looked at the schedules. We had a coach's advisory. We looked at all that. They've already been massaging the schedules. But right now, those schedules are, for the most part, in place. So was it a task? Sure. Was it my task? No. But somebody looked at it, and that's why we looked at it moving forward, just that district piece or maybe additional game if you're able to do so. 8 is an important piece. 6, that pretty much limits you to potentially not playing a district opponent because it maybe got cut out at the beginning of the season, depending upon the size of your district. Did that answer your question? Okay. Anybody else?
If the governor were to say after this next 3 weeks of phase 2, if he said another 3 weeks of phase 2, does that automatically pretty much have to push the season as a 2021 season into January? Because if you're losing those 3 weeks, you would maybe be looking at the model you're looking at right now. Now you're looking at only game 3, 4, or 5 games.
And George, the answer is yes. And we have a proposal we're looking at when we've put the numbers together, because now we're talking about a huge overlap between football and winter sports of wrestling and basketball. I don't know how many basketball players also play football, but I do know there's a large number of football players who wrestle. So now you're cutting into that season, and now you're cutting that season sport to facilitate football. So then now we look at potentially, George, a domino effect. And then we have to address that.
I feel like we've done this a bunch, but so the next thing that we should probably look for from you would be after your September executive committee meeting, some kind of traction moving forward, either if we're on schedule or off schedule.
That's correct. We're working on, we have, like I said, we have plans in place for the safe, I call it the safe reopening of athletics for each one of the sports of cross country. What's a cross country meet going to look like if you're hosting one? How many schools can you have at that cross country meet? How do you keep the static group? How do we have the wave start line? How do we finish? Volleyball, when we get to phase 3, let's say they want to do a 3-way. 2 teams play, they go through all the processes, and then they leave. Then at that point, sanitize everything. We bring in the next team to play a team that was already there, and we start over again. Swimming, same thing, all of those processes. That's going to be the next document that comes out from us. So our membership knows that's going to be how how you members of the media want to cover the event, how you can get in, and how that's going to happen as well, because you want to be safe too. So we're going to work on that piece. Then after the 7th, and then we have the September 8th, 9. We'll know at that point a lot more than we know now. Obviously, that date of the 21 days gone passes. We're in phase 3. We're moving forward. We can long stride a little bit now, and then we start talking about what we're going to do moving forward, and really discussing with the entire committee on what we're going to do with the hiccups and how they're going to be handled in the system itself. Anybody else? Thank all of you for what you've done over the years of high school sports. Great rapport. You've all done a super job. Keep up the good work. Keep your fingers crossed. If you have a good connection with the man above, please say prayers for all of us. God bless all of you, the LHSAA, all you do, and the state of Louisiana. We need to do this, and we can do it together. We need to get it done, okay? Appreciate
Thank
y'all.
you, Eddie.
Thanks, Eddie. Appreciate it.